So when I talk about natural movements or natural positions, say if I was pushing against the wall here, then I'd put my hand on the wall and I'd push, and what I'm doing there is I'm lining up the top of my arm with the forearm so I can drive this part of the arm into the forearm and then push in that direction. So a bad way of pushing would be to have my elbow lower there and to try and push by just tensing my tricep like that. So it'd be for me too, if I had my elbow down here and I was trying to push there by extending my elbow out, then as I pushed in there, loads of energy would be lost here because there's such a bend in it. I'm not using the body lined up. Whereas if I go to push and I lean on it and I lean hard, you see how the elbow comes out in a curve, in a stronger position. Whereas if I drop the elbow, I can start to feel it on my shoulder, and it all becomes on the tricep then, and that'd be a wrong way to push. Now, if I make a fist and I think about the pushing position, then let's look at the fist. I've got two choices. I can either push on this part, or I can push on this part, and whichever. Now, if I look at that there, you can see how this part here lines up right down the middle of the forearm. If I tilt the wrist slightly there, then this part here lines up right down the middle of the forearm. Yeah. So pushing with the knuckles, if we look at the outside three, if I put the outside three on there, then I can line up the outside three there perfectly with my forearm. And when I push on there, interestingly enough, it does go onto the tricep again, but it's lined up. But the problem is when I'm on the lower three, they're sloping, and if I push forward, the arms pull in, the arms move in naturally. So if I'm on this slope and I'm pushing there, then the arms are going to naturally move across, and it's not the outside, this part, any part of that knuckle there that's landing is not on the strongest power line. So the strongest power line is on the other part of the knuckle, on the inside two. So if I then line up, now I'm going to 45 degrees, if I put them two knuckles now on and I push from there, then I can feel that all the force is on my shoulder rather than on my tricep with the lower knuckles. And that's because it's a much stronger position. It's the position that I would be in if I was pushing. If I open my hand there and I push, if I come back to the three knuckles, if I open my hand there, then you can see how bent my arm is. How bent my arm is there compared, if I push there, then the arm comes out in a slight curve, it's supported, the elbow is not low, the elbow is up in a strong position. On the three knuckles there, even on there, because of that slope, there's loads of pressure on my tricep. When I come round to two, it all comes to the shoulder. Much stronger position and much less energy is lost from the outside, but this two knuckle punch is also on the strongest power line. You cannot get on the strong power line in boxing gloves with a boxing punch. So to understand if your punch is supported or not, what you need to do is make a fist, put your hand on the wall in a finished position of whichever angle you're punching at, and then, because all the force is concentrated on the middle knuckle, look at the point that you're landing at on the knuckle and make a 90-degree line behind that. Now if that 90-degree line does not go directly down the middle of the forearm, then it's unsupported. In a boxing glove with a fixed thumb, it's impossible for me to throw a fully supported punch. I cannot get around onto the power line when the thumb's in the way. Now, when I talk about the power line of any punch, there's a specific line that I start from, say, if however far back my hand can go, there's a line or an angle that I can follow, and if I stay as closely as I can on that power line, then that will make that punch as powerful as it can be, as I can line it up right from the start. If I'm not on that power line as I'm throwing the punch and then I come onto the power line at the end, it'll still be stronger than if I throw a punch that never actually gets onto the most, onto the strongest and most efficient line. So when we look at the boxing gloves, with the boxing gloves forcing you to hit with the outside part of the middle knuckle, then you cannot get around onto the strongest kinetic part. So what this does is it forces you, because I'm coming round and I'm coming over like this, or I'm coming over like this, as I'm coming out to finish the shot, because I'm trying to get onto the power line, I have to tense my tricep with every punch, with the boxing punch. So as I'm coming out, and because the power line is this side, rather than me coming as close as I can to the power line, I have to sort of, with a swinging punch, I have to sort of bring it back a little bit and then swing it out to try and get around onto the other side. And that's tensing the tricep, and that wears the arms out, and it's also a bad way to push. So you think about stronger positions. The strongest position I'm in when I deliver the punch, the more energy is fired out of the end when I'm all lined up. If my elbow's lower, then I'll have energy leaking out of that. My shoulder's not in the right position, there'll be energy leaking out of that. So it's connecting up the chain, connecting up all the links, and trying to complete the full kinetic chain. And that's what makes the difference, is making sure all the links are connected. One little gap and there can be a massive difference in their power levels. So when we look at a standard boxing glove, it's got a fixed thumb in a position that's sort of leaning forward slightly. When I take the glove off and I look at that position in the glove, you can see how that's the sort of position that my hand's in the glove. And when I make a fist, my thumb is tucked around. In the glove, when it's relaxed, I'm like that. When I land a punch, the thumb stays forward. I can't tuck that thumb out of the way, so the thumb stays forward. Now if I turn over here now, you can see how with that thumb out, I've got no problem at all landing on the outside of the 3 knuckles, on this spot. But if I then want to land on this part, the inside of the knuckle, there, then you can see how the thumb is sticking out. That's in the way. If I come over to the 3 there, you can see I can land on that outside part of the knuckle, the thumb is not in the way at all. But if I'm looking at hitting with this part, then I spike the thumb first, and I cannot move that thumb round in standard boxing gloves. And the strongest power line is on the inside, where I cannot punch with. So in standard boxing gloves, you can't throw the strongest punch available, which is crazy. You can't even make a fist in standard boxing gloves. How did it get to the point where in a sport where you make a fist to throw a punch, the gloves that they make for it, you cannot make a fist in? And the problem with this is it's taking away so much power. When you punch kinetically on the strongest power line, then over 3 rounds, if that's 25 punches over 3 rounds, then it's more than double the power of the boxing punch. Just because you're lining your body up in a stronger position and delivering a much more efficient punch. So even with the most powerful point that I can hit a boxing glove on, and that's the furthest round I can get on the knuckle, on this knuckle, without hitting this thumb. So the furthest round, about there, the furthest round I can get. So that is more or less directly in line, right down that bone. That's still the outside of the knuckle. 3/4 of the knuckle is what I call the outside. It's only the inside quarter that lines up the knuckle kinetically. with the forearm. So now when I look at this glove, it might look like it's exactly the same, which it is the same glove, but I've already modified it. So am I throwing a boxing punch? No, because my thumb is tucked in behind there. So my fist is in this position in this glove. So the difference with a swing and a drive can be quite big. And when you swing something, you don't have nowhere near the control that you do with the drive. Now, if you think about a hammer, I swing the hammer. The problem is with the swing is, as soon as I've let go of the swing, I've got very little control over that swing. You think about with a jackhammer, which is more of a driving thing, what you're doing is it's driving it forward and putting it in. And you think if I'm coming out, if I come out halfway, I can slow down and stop. I can come right out and slow. I've got more control over this movement than I have over the. Once I throw this, it's swung, it's gone, it's already. I've got no control over it. So I think about if I put a weight on this chain and I let it go. As soon as I let that go, I've got very little control over it. I can't slow it down. I can't stop it if it's going in the wrong direction. There's just a lot less control. So if I then think about, like with a jackhammer that drives a shot forward and comes out in that strong sort of forward position, then like with this, once this lets go, it's swung and it's almost out of control. Whereas if I'm firing out like this and I've got this control, then I can fire straight out, and I come back and I can control the speed at that. I can slow it down if it's not in the right place. I've just got so much more control and much more precision as well. So another interesting point with this is if I'm swinging here at long range, if I'm swinging here, then I've got to finish the motion at the end, and it's really hard to sort of get any power with any swing close in. So whereas with the swing you just haven't got the control, with the driving shot, if I then have control over the weight at the end, then rather than just letting it go and it swings and I've got no control, then I can control that, and even if I'm close, I'm in position. I can move out. If I think I'm going to break something, I can stop, I can pull it back. So I've got much more control over the driving motion than I have over the swing. So there's two ways to throw a punch. One way is the driving punch, and one way is a swinging punch. Now the swinging punch is like throwing a stone basically. You think if I step and then as I go to throw the stone, the whip comes through my shoulder drops and then it whips through and then it comes out. And that's a swinging motion. Like I swing a baseball bat. To swing a punch out is I'm coming out, the shoulder drops and then it swings. So you think with a hook, if I throw like that, then if I'm throwing a hook like that, it's that same motion where I come up and then the hand whips forward. That's swinging. The more you exaggerate the whip, the more it looks like a hammer fist. But that's not what I'm actually doing. So if you think about with a boxing punch, if I'm coming in and I'm doing a tight hook, then I'm dropping in there. Because I can't get on the strong position, it has to be a swing. I cannot drive that shot in. Now, if I'm coming over and I'm looking at throwing over and then getting as close to the line as I can, and that's what you find when with the professional boxers, they have a much more refined punch, but they still have to swing at the end because they're not on the power line. So if I come out with a straight shot there, you can see how it could be very, very similar to being in line. And it's what they're doing is they're getting as close to the power line as they can in the gloves, but they have to come off the power line to pull it back in to get that little, you have to put a little extra swing on the end to get it in because they're not on the power line. So as they come in, they just whip that little bit over, or with a longer, when they're throwing a longer range hook, they'll come in slightly up and then drop in. So the more refined it is, the more they're coming in and just popping over, but as they're coming in, it's actually a swing where the elbow is lower and then it drops over. And most boxing gloves have got the shape where you naturally land on the lower knuckles. If I just let my hand go out and just touch that, it doesn't land on the two knuckles. It's like they don't even know they exist. It's designed to land on the lower knuckles like you do in the boxing gloves. So by altering the thumb and designing it a bit better, there's no reason why you couldn't hit with a much stronger punch, the kinetic punch, in the boxing gloves. So even when I'm coming out with a punch like this and I'm rotating round, as you come out like this and it rotates around, that is a swing. If you're coming over, down like this, that is a swing. Even and horizontally as well, even if you're hitting horizontally, that is a swing. So kinetically, what I want to be doing is lining up the forearm with the knuckles in the right position as soon as I can on that direct power line. And that way it becomes a drive rather than a swing. So if I exaggerate that, if I'm from here, if I bring my elbow up into my strongest position, it's like I'm pulling a bow back. If I think about starting at that position, then if I rotate my body and move forward, then that drives my hand out. Whereas if I was swinging, then as I went to move, my shoulder would drop, elbow would follow, and the hand would come through with a punch. It'd be more like this, where I'm just coming over that way, punching horizontal. But they all finish with a swing, because it's a swinging motion. So the drive, as soon as I move, the elbow comes up and it drives in and out on the strong power line. So the sooner I get onto the power line as I'm throwing the punch, the stronger it will be when I deliver the punch. The longer time I spend on that power line, the more power it has. So, swing, drive, swing, drive. So also, just like with the swing demonstrated earlier, you've got nowhere near the control over the punch when you're swinging it out that you have with a drive. So you think about if I'm throwing out a standard punch and I'm just rotating at the end, vertical or horizontal again, and I'm just turning at the end there, it's only at the point that I rotate around and turn that my arm is ready to finish the punch. Whereas if I throw a lined up kinetic punch along the power line, almost as soon as I throw that punch, my arm is lined up on the power line. So it never gets on the power line with a boxing punch at all. As soon as I go to throw the punch, I'm lined up with a kinetic punch. So if all of a sudden it moves in or the range changes, which it does 98% of the time, then I'm going to be able to finish that punch at a different range. I've got much more control over this. I can pull that. I don't need to. If I think it's going to hurt, their head drops down. I don't want to be punching someone in the skull. I've got more control over that. If I've swung the punch and it's already gone, I can't stop that. It's going to hurt. Even if I realise at the point that I'm about to throw it that they're in the wrong position and it will hurt me. You can't do anything about it. Whereas if you throw him with a drive, then you can put the brakes on. You can slow it down, but it's also with the shockwaves gives you so much more control. Just quickly, the shockwaves, I'd say the shockwaves are 50% of what the kinetic punch is, basically. and it makes up 50% of the punch, and it's all about sharpening and refining the types of snap that you do on the end of the punch. So you train different types of explosiveness, from speed to power, and then you can pick that type, a certain type of explosive shockwave to put on the end of each punch. Certain punches suit better shockwaves, but that's what I'm doing with the shockwaves. So also, if I'm throwing a driving hook in, then I've got the options to brake or slow down if I think it's going to hurt, and because of the snap that I'm going to put on the end, I don't need to put the snap on the end if it's going to hurt. So it dramatically reduces the chance of hurting or fracturing your hands as well. Now, if you think about the swing, if I'm punching over here and I go to throw the swing in, before I turn around here, as I'm throwing that in, the little knuckles are exposed. As I'm throwing this punch out with the swing, it's only until I turn over that it stops the little knuckles being exposed. Whereas with a kinetic punch, as soon as I go to throw the punch, the knuckles are lined up. I've got the control over that drive. I'm not swinging. Much more controlled and much more deliverable power at closer range and at longer range. So a couple of more points about the swing, quite interesting. So you need to put more power into a swing. It just takes much more energy to put the swing in. Whereas if you think, if I'm lined up and I don't need to move anywhere else, then all I'm doing is really rotating the body. As I rotate, I line everything up, then I'm just carrying on rotating. I don't need to tense up every single time. Now, what's interesting with the kinetic punch is I finish that with my shoulder, and I don't need to tense my tricep every single time I punch. So you're not tiring your arms out. If your arms get kicked and they get knackered, you can still punch just as hard because you're using your body and your arm position, not your tricep, to finish the punch. So it's much more efficient. Now, when we think about aiming, this is quite interesting. There's a big difference in the ability to aim with a driving punch than there is with a swinging punch. And that's because I don't have to put on the swing on the end, basically. The easiest way to explain it would be, if I reached out, if I'm doing a kinetic punch, then I'm coming out on a smooth curve, and basically it's like I'm just reaching out and touching. So I just have to look at roughly where the distance is, and then rotate the body and line that up. Now, if I'm throwing a boxing punch and it's got a swing on the end, then I'm not just coming out to touch. I've got to put an extra swing on that. So whatever distance it is, rather than me just coming out and touching, I've got to come out and then judge another swing on that as I'm coming to land. So there's much more to think about and much more energy. So when I drive in, I come round on a smooth curve. With a swing, I'm swinging over, and rather than just like if I was having my hand open and I was touching, I'd just reach out and touch at what I was looking at. Whereas with the punch, I'd have to come forward and swing forward as I was going to reach it. So it takes a lot more aiming. So if I'm coming over with a kinetic hook, I'm coming straight in and the target's there, I'm literally just coming in and touching it. Whereas if I was putting a whip on it, I'd have to come in, bring the hand up, and then whip down as I land. So there's a lot more motion included, there's a lot more to think about by using the whip. So with the shockwaves, I do put whips on the shockwaves, but that's right at the end, and it's nothing to do with the major whipping motion or the drive. Like I say, most of the punches I teach are driving punches, just because they're so much stronger, more efficient, and just lose so much energy, so much less energy. I mean, so it's hard enough to land a punch when you've got the mechanics in the right position and to judge that distance, just to actually land the position. And if I'm here and I'm just rotating round, then all I need to do is point in the direction as much as I can, and then just come in and land as such. That's with the drive. If I'm whipping or swinging the shot in, then I have to put an extra whip on the end. So it's almost like, instead of me just reaching out and touching it, what I've got to do is I've got to put a whip on the end of that. So what it reminds me of is, it's like I've got a towel, and it's the judging and the timing I've got to get. That's what it's like, is the same timing with the whip when you throw the swing out. So there's a lot more to think about by lining up that whip, and everybody's moving. So here's the interesting thing: you cannot drive a punch in boxing gloves. It's just impossible. You have to be lined up to the right part of the knuckle to drive the shot in. If you're not, then even if you do throw the drive in motion, it still becomes a swing because you're not lined up and you're not on the power line. So as you finish the punch, you end up putting a bit of extra swing on it to try and pull your knuckle round so it gets deeper on that power line. So I think about, if let's look at an overhand there. If I throw an overhand kinetically lined up, then as soon as I start, I really want my elbow will be down, but as soon as I start, the elbow picks up the power line following the knuckle, and then it comes out on a curve. Now with a boxing glove on, when I do that same sort of motion, and that was slightly different then, because I'm having to hit with this part of the knuckle, not the inside, so I can't actually line up the power line. So when I try and do a drive there, it ends up coming out again with the elbow down, because it's this outside unsupported part. As I'm landing, I end up tensing the tricep again, trying to dig it in so it lines up with the power line. So a kinetic overhand comes over smooth. A boxing overhand would come over and then it swings out at the end, because you're hitting with the outside knuckle here, it's on a slope, and when I hit there, the arms move inwards, so you don't get nowhere near the driving impact, because you're not on the power line and you're not lined up with the correct knuckles to be on that power line, so you end up swinging the shot. So you cannot drive a punch in boxing gloves, and it makes a big difference. With the straight punches, we're looking at 40%. With a kinetic punch, that's how much difference it is based with the boxing. With the hooks, you're looking at a 30% difference in power. But it's not just, we've had the power levels measured, but it's how it feels. It's a smaller area. The area I'm punching with is a fingertip area I'm looking at to hit with. Because everything's lined up, it feels a lot harder, it hurts a lot more. So when I'm punching on the ground, it's no different to the driving when I'm stood up. So the standard punch, you would come out again and you'd swing it in and finish it with your tricep, and you lose so much power basing it on your tricep when you're lower down and you haven't got the power to build in your legs. So again, I'm not swinging like this like I would in boxing gloves. What I'm doing is I'm coming over on a smooth curve and driving down. And again, this is no different to when I'm stood up. There's one most efficient power line that I can move my hand on and land on. And it's a driving motion, not a swinging motion. So the straights on the ground are 35% harder than the boxing punches the MMA guys use on the ground. When I'm stood to the ground, my hooking punch coming down from when I'm stood up is 53% harder than the boxing version of that punch. So even on the ground, you're just getting a huge benefit. and the kinetic punch cannot be ignored. When I talk about the kinetic punch, it's universal. So if I keep my hand open, you think about the straight, I go as straight as I can. Then if I put a slight curve on that, bit more of a curve, bit more of a curve, that's a cross. Bit more of a curve, bit more of a curve, that's more like an overhand, more of a curve overhand, more of a curve, that's more of a hook, and then a big curve, proper hook. But all I'm doing, it's exactly the same principles, 45 degrees, 45 degrees, 45 degrees, 45 degrees, and I'm not at any time swinging in. The mechanics are different, and by lining up this knuckle, you use the body more efficiently to fire the shots in, and you use a lot less energy. So when I talk about the percentages, there's just such a big difference. But if we're looking at 25 punches over 3 rounds, then that's 105% difference in power. I mean, that is a huge difference. It's a massive difference with a punch that's so much more controllable, and you just so much less energy to throw because it's more efficient as well. That difference in power, particularly when people are looking for that 1 or 2% extra to beat the next guy, you know. If you're looking at 100% difference in the power level that you've got now compared with the power level you'll have when you're punching kinetically. And now, when I look at the UFC and I look at MMA fighters, there's a very, very, very small percentage of people that are just starting to throw kinetic punches. So it'll just give you a massive advantage in the power levels you have, the energy that you use to throw punches, and your precision will go up. The shock waves take your precision to a whole new level, and the explosiveness at close range will build your punches to a level you never really understood before, because by lining up everything and refining everything, by tweaking every little part, that whole is just such a big difference. Once you feel the difference, and that's what one of the students I had said, he said, once you feel the difference, there's no way you'll punch another way. And that's a problem sometimes when you watch stuff and you watch clips. You know, you could watch a clip of mine, or you could watch it. I could send you all of my clips, my DVDs, but you'd still only have an idea of what it was I was doing. You wouldn't know for sure that you were doing exactly what I was showing. Now that's the problem. And the thing is with training is I could train for years, and it's like when you start training and you're training and you're training. What you're doing is you're learning to understand fact. So through a lot of the learning, what you're doing is what you think the guy that is teaching you is asking you to do. Once you get to another level, then you know for a fact the way you're doing something is exactly how your coach is asking you to teach. So if you're watching my videos and you think you know exactly how I'm punching, and you haven't trained with me or felt exactly the differences in the shock waves or the difference in the standard punch and the kinetic punch, then you don't know for fact just what a difference this punch is going to make.